It was beautiful. I don't know how anyone hits a note that high, but it was just stunning that you're here again, making our very, very special ceremony even more so. I'd like to have our speaker come forward, Major David Yuers, U.S. Air Force, retired. Now, when I say retired, don't feel bad. He's only been retired for a month. Major Yuers is a charter member of the Exchange Club, whom we never see at meetings, because when I tell you where he's been deployed, you'll understand. He has served proudly for 4 decades in the Air Force, the Air National Guard, the Air Force Reserve, before retiring last month. After he worked directly for the Air Force Chief of Staff at the Pentagon, Major Yuers served as the Air Force Reserve Deputy Director and Operations Officer for the Joint Reserve Intelligence, which, since my brother was in the Air Force, that usually means I can't tell you what they did. So, never knew.
Flying saucers.
Flying saucers. It's good for me that we had one of those at the museum exhibit last week. He did that for the Strategic Command based in Phoenix, Arizona. He led the Air Force Reserve and Navy Reserve intelligence analysts on an all-source intelligence production and fusion mission targeting strategic threats. Major Yuers, who lives in Walnut Creek, was born and raised in the East Bay and continues to live here with his wife, Irina. And where's our new scout, Stephen? Stephen, please stand up. Where are you? There he is, right down by the water. So looking very sharp in his new scout uniform. He's 7 years old.
Six.
He's 6 years old?
He looks 7, but he's 6.
Oh my goodness. Well, I didn't know you could get that patriotic in only 6 years. That's pretty good. So, but Major Yuers holds a bachelor degree in political science from San Francisco State University and a master's degree in military operational art and science with a joint warfare concentration from Air University in Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama. During his military career, the reason we never saw him at Exchange Club is he was deployed to Egypt, Germany, Turkey, Kuwait, Romania, Iraq, South Korea, the United Kingdom, Djibouti, Kyrgyzstan, Djibouti, and Afghanistan. So he'd earned both the Air Force Commendation and the Army Commendation Medal, the Joint Service Achievement Medal, the Air Force Achievement Medal, the Joint Meritorious Unit Award, the Air Force Outstanding Unit Award with Valor. We are really proud to hear the remarks of Major Yuers, who represents the Air Force, and what a great way it was to start today with a flyover, thanks to Lee Halverson and the pilots who were in training planes that were actually used in battle, I believe. Regardless, it was a pretty awesome beginning. So let's have a big hand for the flyover from Mark Becker. Major Yuers, welcome.
Thank you, Karen. And I'd like to also thank the Exchange Club of San Ramon Valley for doing this for so long. I appreciate that. And also this Monte Vista Choir, you guys sound fantastic. So let's give them another round too. And I'd like to thank, stand by, okay. I'd like to thank everybody here for attending this evening. I appreciate seeing so many people because this is a very important day to all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a privilege and honor to speak today at the All Wars Memorial here in Danville. We are all here to acknowledge one of the most significant global events which affected nearly each and every one of us 20 years ago today. When I say nearly each and every one of us, some of us weren't alive then. Again, the Boy Scouts, the Monte Vista Choir, I see a lot of young faces, but most of us remember that. For those of us old enough to remember, September 11th, 2001 made an impact as significant to our lives as other infamous days many of us will never forget. Some of our fellow Americans here today, Ford Island and Pearl Harbor, they recall the attack on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Others remember the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Many of us also recall the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger. Pearl Harbor defined a generation, the greatest generation. One nation's military forces attacked military targets located in Hawaii. And that is how Americans defined war. a uniformed military adversary fighting our armed forces. On September 11, 2001, America learned that that was not the preferred method of our enemy, Islamic jihadism. On that day, with the exception of the Pentagon, normal everyday American civilians were the target. On this day 20 years ago, our enemy did not care whether you wore a uniform or not. We learned our enemy was prepared to kill us no matter what our faith was, what our race was, what our political party was, or whether we were men or women, adults or children. None of that mattered. All of us were targeted. Our enemies were prepared to kill all of us. We were also reminded that day that our first responders were also prepared to save all of us. Our first responders were there for all Americans, rich, poor, believers and non-believers, abled or disabled, men, women, boys and girls. If there was anyone wearing the badge of a police officer or firefighter, they all reminded us that while the rest of us ran from any disaster, hazard, or threat of any kind, so long as any American was in harm's way, then those same police officers and firefighters ran towards the danger. All met the challenge of their profession. All honored their oaths. All did their duty. Many gave the last full measure of their devotion to their vocation as first responders that day. And today, 20 years later, we honor their sacrifice and heroism. The armed forces of the United States of America, including every branch of the military, has followed the example set by those first responders. Many Americans found themselves wondering 20 years ago, how could such a calamity occur? There were indications, there were warnings. As an intelligence officer, even 20 years ago, I was aware of many of these indications and warnings. The United States of America has been afflicted with Islamic jihadism for 40 years now. Less than a year after I put on this uniform, on April 18, 1983, the American embassy, at sovereign American soil, in Beirut, Lebanon, was bombed by jihadists, killing 17 Americans, including 8 CIA officers, 3 Army soldiers, and a Marine. At the time, I was focused on the threat from the Soviet Union. Yet this was the opening salvo of jihadist attacks on the United States. 5 years later, Osama bin Laden organized a group of jihadists in Afghanistan, which he labeled as the base, and which we now know as Al-Qaeda. It didn't take Al-Qaeda long to begin attacking the United States. On February 26, 1993, the first attack occurred on American soil at the World Trade Center in New York City. On that day, a truck bomb in the underground parking garage killed 6 Americans and injured thousands more. 3 years later, in August 1996, Al-Qaeda issued a public declaration of war from its base camp in Afghanistan. Angry about the American infidel occupied bases at Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, Al-Qaeda's response was to issue a fatwa against the entire United States. The response from the presidential administration at that time was silence. The Western media also ignored it. And so most Americans never heard of Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, or Islamic Jihad. On August 7th, 1998, 2 of our embassies in Africa, one in Tanzania and one in Kenya, were bombed. 12 Americans were killed. Osama bin Laden was then placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, and the response from the presidential administration at the time was to send a missile into a Sudanese aspirin factory. On October 12, 2000, an American guided missile destroyer, the USS Cole, was bombed by Al-Qaeda while refueling in Yemen's Aden Harbor. 17 Navy sailors were killed, but there still wasn't any large response from the United States. And the greater American public appeared to be unaware. Less than a year after the bombing of the USS Cole, 20 years ago today, the threat of Al-Qaeda came home to our shores. We are all familiar with what happened that day. This community in particular recognizes this. as many of the American heroes who distinguished themselves on that day were from here. United States Army Lieutenant Colonel Dean Matson was from California, but was in the Pentagon that day. Thomas F. McGinnis was also from California. A former Top Gun Navy fighter pilot, he had just moved his family to Portsmouth, New Hampshire to fly for American Airlines. He was the first officer aboard Flight 11, which crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Maclovio Joe Lopez Jr., a construction worker from California, was a passenger on board United Airlines Flight 175, which crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. Thomas Burnett of San Ramon distinguished himself as well. A passenger of Flight 93, his aircraft was being flown towards the United States Capitol by terrorists who had hijacked the aircraft from its crew. Rather than concede this victory to the enemy, Thomas Burnett led the passengers of Flight 93 in an attempt to prevent one further catastrophe. His last words were, "We're going in." Flight 93 did not reach its intended target, but instead crashed into a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, with all souls on board. Now the entire country was aware of Al-Qaeda. As Americans, we were reminded once again to take nothing for granted, to appreciate this country, to count our blessings, to be grateful for our hard-fought and hard-won freedoms, to cherish the American way, and to treasure our friends and family. Today, Americans gather at the Pentagon in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, at the New York World Trade Center Memorial, and at the hundreds of other places like this around the country and around the globe. United in purpose, we gather together to remember the victims of this vicious and unprecedented act of terror against this country. We also gather together to recall, remember, and honor those first responders, police officers, firefighters, emergency medical technicians, paramedics, chaplains, nurses, and doctors who distinguished themselves not only on that day, but in the days and weeks that followed. We may even recall the working dogs who searched for survivors in the smoldering wreckage of the Pentagon and the Twin Towers. We honor those in the armed forces, each and every branch, who went into harm's way halfway across the world to confront, degrade, and destroy those who would dare to attack our fellow Americans. They took the fight to the enemy. Let us also honor the United States Coast Guard. Until September 11th, 2001, the largest sea lift operation in history was the mass withdrawal of Dunkirk, France in the spring of 1940, where almost 340,000 English and French soldiers were evacuated across the English Channel. That took 9 days. But 20 years ago today, the United States Coast Guard contributed 10 cutters to a fleet of over 100 other boats, which rescued survivors stranded on Manhattan Island after the total shutdown of all subways, bridges, and tunnels. The Coast Guard evacuated almost 500,000 people and did it in 9 hours. The rest of the military did their part that day and in the days ever since. The United States extended the war against Islamic jihadism throughout the Middle East and fought against this threat to Western civilization, no matter what name it went by or called itself, from Al-Shabaab in Somalia to ISIS in Iraq. Coast Guardsmen, guardians, soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines have deployed overseas over the last 20 years to fight Islamic jihadism. We met Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and drove them out. We met ISIS in Iraq and drove them out. We met Al-Shabaab in Somalia and drove them out. Through the skirmishes of urban combat taking place on the streets of Fallujah, to the battlefields of the Mesopotamian basin in Syria, to the deserts of the Horn of Africa, to the Mediterranean coast of Libya, to the mountains of the Hindu Kush in Afghanistan, let's be clear. The United States military has triumphed in every battle, each and every time. Many of these individuals have been wounded, though, in too many cases, quite severely. And many have also died. We all mourn their loss. Yet let us never forget their families, their parents, their sisters, their brothers, their spouses, their children. The poet John Milton wrote, "They also serve who stand and wait." The families who support and pray for their loved ones to safely return from combat zones are considered to be the ultimate heroes by those of us in the military. We know what we are dealing with when we are deployed, yet our families are often in the dark, uncertain of our fate and dealing with the unknown. Then there are the survivors of those whom we have lost, the Gold Star families. We also honor them, especially today. Let us also remember Operation Neptune Spear, the mission carried out by Navy SEALs, which permanently ended Osama bin Laden's jihad, his leadership of Al-Qaeda, and his life. Let us also remember Operation Falcon Talon, the mission carried out by Air Force fighter pilots, which permanently ended Abu Musab al-Zakari's jihad, his leadership of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and his life. Let us also remember Task Force 814, the mission carried out by Delta Force, Army Rangers, and a military working dog named Conan, which permanently ended Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's jihad, his leadership of ISIS, and his life. Let us also remember the recent justice meted out to the leaders of the Islamic State in Khorasan province, also known as the ISKP, who were targeted by the Guardians of the United States Space Force following the attack on Americans late last month, and were swiftly meted out the justice they had earned for themselves. We will never forget. I'm going to take a minute here to address the events of this last month. I first enlisted into the Air Force on the 7th of October, 1981, my senior year of high school. The first day of the war in Afghanistan was less than a month after the 9/11 attack, October 7th, 2001. I had been enlisted for exactly 20 years that day. And from September 11th to October 7th that year, I was in Kuwait as part of a deployment to protect the Shiites in southern Iraq from Saddam Hussein. Those of you old enough to remember will recall it was called enforcing the no-fly zones. I could have retired then, but decided to stay in uniform and see this through. After spending over 20 years as an enlisted man, I earned a commission in Air Force Reserve, and over the next several years deployed to the Horn of Africa, Qatar, Iraq, and Afghanistan. I stayed in uniform, part-time, to do my part. But I don't know anyone among the rank and file who believed we should be in Afghanistan to establish a democracy there, or to rebuild it as a nation. Most of us thought the response to what happened on 9/11 should have been simple retaliation against the forces which attacked us and denial of any safe haven to them through the use of allies such as the Northern Alliance, special operations such as the men in Delta Force, Green Berets, Marine Recon, Marine Raiders, SEALs, or either direct targeting via Hellfire missiles, indirect targeting via the GBU-43 Massive Ordnance Air Blast, also known as the MOAB, which is better known as the mother of all bombs, or simple carpet bombing, all of which we were and are capable of. But the decision to remain in Afghanistan was made at a much higher pay grade than ours. And so yesterday I read the following by Patrick Buchanan. When the hijacked planes hit the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, that first 9/11, the Taliban were in control of Afghanistan and providing sanctuary for Al-Qaeda. Today, the Taliban are in control of Afghanistan and providing sanctuary to Al-Qaeda. What then did our longest war accomplish? I can honestly say that question demands an answer, especially to those who were killed over there. The last ones being 11 Marines, 1 soldier, and 1 sailor, a Navy corpsman. To my fellow veterans of the war in Afghanistan who left their arms and legs and eyes back there, some of you who now struggle with PTSD and are coping with other disabilities, I can honestly say we did what we had to do, and what happened is not on us. It is partly because of the lack of accountability from our leaders, both civilian and military, for the chain of bad decisions made, over the last several years especially, that I put in for retirement, which was approved on July 1st, just a little bit over 2 months ago. I can't speak for all of us, but most of the ones I know were happy to see America finally leave Afghanistan. What disturbs us is the manner in which we left. Pat Buchanan wrote of a situation that had not changed, and yet it had. When we were attacked 20 years ago, our enemy didn't have our uniforms, our weapons, our equipment, and our vehicles. To repeat, what we witnessed is, to put it the most delicate way I can possibly say, disturbing. But none of that changes our determination and resolve to honor those who perished this day 20 years ago. Honor those who fought on the battlefields thousands of miles from our homeland to defend our homeland, or to honor everyone's sacrifice. All Americans have demonstrated our legacy of determination and resolve throughout our brief history as a nation. Our chain of victories over empires, fascism, and communism is testimony to the continuing truth. We will continue to fight the good fight against terrorism for as long as it takes to permanently end this threat to Western civilization, the free world, and the United States of America. The men and women who have joined the fight against America's foreign enemies have, since September 11, 2001, all of them have been volunteers. No one's been drafted. Many who wear the uniform today, 18 and 19 years old, were not even alive on this day 20 years ago. Yet this new generation has picked up the torch passed down to them from previous generations of warriors, and they will meet the challenge. It is a testament to all of you who are attending this event that we, none of us, will never ever forget the events of that infamous day. And I thank all of you for your attendance and presence here on a beautiful Saturday afternoon to remember this day on its 20th anniversary. God bless the souls lost on this day 20 years ago. God bless their loved ones. God bless the first responders who answered the call of duty on this day and the days that followed. And God bless the loved ones of the first responders as well, especially the 412 who perished. God bless the Coast Guardsmen, Guardians, soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who have picked up our flag and took the fight to the enemies who seek the harm of all Americans over the last 2 decades. And God bless their loved ones as well, particularly the Gold Star families. Thank you all for being here, and God bless America.
We are stunned by the events that we've all lived through, and we all have people we lost over the last 20 years. So again, it's with great gratitude that we salute someone who was in the service for 40 years, remembering to protect your loved ones and all of us on American soil. So thank you very much, Major Yuers. So.